There's a conversation happening right now across culture, coming from completely different directions, but all of them pointing to the exact same underlying fracture. You hear divorce attorneys talking about why marriages end. You hear neuroscientists breaking down dopamine and attention. You hear relationship experts trying to explain why desire fades or why connection feels harder to sustain over time. This episode is brought to you by my HarperCollins published book, Mind Over Explicit Matter. Learn how artificial stimulation miswires your brain and what you can do to rewire it back to purpose, intimacy, and connection. Go to drtrishleigh.com/book. People like Esther Perel will talk about the tension between stability and desire. Andrew Huberman, he'll explain how overstimulation reshapes the brain. James Sexton will lay out the practical reasons relationships collapse. And if you're actually listening closely, what becomes acutely clear is that they're all describing the same breakdown, but they're describing it from different layers of the same problem. Because what's actually breaking down isn't just relationships, it's regulation. And that's a much bigger issue than people realize. Because regulation is what allows you to stay. It's what allows you to remain present in something that isn't constantly changing. It allows you to tolerate stillness, to engage with depth, to build something over time instead of needing constant variation to feel alive. And right now, we are living in a culture that is systematically training the brain away from that ability, not intentionally, but consistently. Through everything that we consume, every single scroll, every single thing that you give your attention to, it's training. Attention is not neutral. That's the part people miss. It's not passive, and it's certainly not harmless. Attention is one of the most powerful training mechanisms the brain has ever had. Whatever you repeatedly give your attention to, your brain begins to prioritize. It becomes more sensitive to it. It starts to expect it. And right now, we are feeding the brain a very specific type of input. Fast, novel, high intensity, constantly switching stimulation, which means over time, your brain adapts to that level. It recalibrates to what normal feels like. And anything below that level, anything slower, steadier, more consistent, it starts to feel like not enough. Now take that brain and put it in a long-term relationship. Put it in a conversation. Put it in a quiet moment with another person. And suddenly, something feels off. Not wrong exactly, but not engaging in the same way. Not stimulating in the same way. And instead of recognizing that as a shift in your brain performance, we interpret it as a problem in the relationship. We start asking, why doesn't this feel the same anymore? Why am I not as interested? Why is this harder than it should be? Now, those are valid questions, but they're being asked at the wrong level. Because the issue isn't that the relationship lost something, most times. It's that the brain lost sensitivity to it. And that's where the cultural conversation starts to break down. Because we're trying to solve a neurological problem with relational solutions. We're trying to fix it by changing partners or changing dynamics or adding novelty or increasing stimulation inside the relationship itself. But if the baseline system is dysregulated, those changes don't solve the problem. They temporarily mask it, and the pattern remains. Because the pattern isn't about the person. It's about what your brain has been trained to respond to. And this is where media becomes one of the most influential forces in shaping that pattern. Not just explicit content, but the entire ecosystem of modern consumption. The speed, the infinite scroll, the constant suggestion of something slightly better, slightly more engaging, slightly more worth your attention. You're never meant to land. You're meant to continue. And that creates a very specific psychological state, one where satisfaction is always just out of reach, close enough to keep you engaged, but not enough to let you settle. That almost state is incredibly powerful because it keeps the brain searching. It keeps the system activated. And over time, it builds a loop where you are constantly moving towards something, but rarely ever arriving fully. And that loop doesn't stay confined to your phone. It generalizes. It becomes the way that you experience your entire life, the way you experience your relationships, especially your primary relationship, the way you experience yourself. So now you're sitting across from someone you care about, maybe even deeply, someone you chose. And instead of fully landing in that moment, there's a subtle pull, a slight sense that something else might be more engaging. And it might happen not even consciously, not intentionally, but it is happening neurologically. And that creates a distance that's hard to explain because it's not loud. It's not screaming at you. It's not dramatic. It doesn't show up as a clear conflict. It might be easier if it did. It shows up as a lack of depth, a lack of presence, and a lack of full engagement. And over time, that becomes indifference. Not because you don't care, but because your system doesn't know how to stay connected without high levels of stimulation. And this is where behaviors start to shift, where people start looking for something outside of the relationship. And this isn't even because they necessarily want to leave, but because they're trying to feel something again, that intensity, that rush. They're trying to match the level of stimulation their brain has been conditioned to expect. And this is where we see patterns like infidelity or chronic dissatisfaction or the quiet erosion of connection. Again, not as moral failures, but as downstream effects of a dysregulated system. What's important to understand here is that once a pattern is learned, it doesn't require conscious intention to continue. Hear that. The brain becomes efficient. It starts to anticipate. It starts to guide behavior toward what it has learned will produce this certain state, the one that you are looking for. And that's where people start to feel like they're not fully in control, if they can even realize it. Like they're following something rather than choosing it. And that's a very different experience of your own behavior. Here, my friend, is the part that changes everything. A regulated life feels completely different from that. It's not louder. It's not more intense. It's not constantly exciting. In fact, from the outside, it might look less stimulating. But from the inside, it feels more real. There's a steadiness to it, a clarity. You're not being pulled in multiple directions at once. You're not scanning for something better. You're not needing to elevate your state just to feel engaged. You're present. And because you're present, things that used to feel flat start to come back online. Conversations feel deeper and more meaningful again. Connection feels enlightening and it has depth to it. Even attraction feels different because it's no longer competing with artificially amplified inputs. And that's what people don't realize that they've really lost. Not desire, not connection, but regulation. Because regulation is what allows those things to exist in a stable way. Without it, everything becomes dependent on spikes. And spikes are not sustainable. They require escalation. They require novelty. They require more. And that's not how long-term relationships are built. Trust me, I know. So the real question isn't just what's wrong with relationships today. It's what has my brain been trained to expect from them? Because that expectation is shaping everything. How you feel, how you connect, how you interpret your experiences, and ultimately how your relationships either sustain or break down over time. And if you actually want to change that, you don't start by forcing different behaviors. You start by changing what your system is exposed to. And you start by retraining your attention, by reducing the constant input that's pulling your system out of that regulated state, by allowing your brain to recalibrate to lower, more stable baseline. And that process, it doesn't feel exciting at first. It feels quieter, sometimes even a little uncomfortable at the beginning. But that discomfort isn't a problem. It's a sign that your system is adjusting, because the brain is neuroplastic. It adapts in both directions. It can be trained into dysregulation, and fantastically, it can be trained out of it. And when that shift happens, something very simple but incredibly powerful comes back online. Choice. Not forced, not controlled through effort, but real internal choice, where you're no longer reacting to what your brain has been conditioned to seek. You're deciding what you actually want. And from that place, everything changes. Okay, if you're looking for help on the journey, my friend, please reach out to drtrishleigh.com. Schedule private one-on-one time with me. I can help point you in a direction. If you're inspired, have your brain mapped. In a QEEG brain map, I can see the areas and the levels of dysfunction that are pulling your brain and nervous system out of that regulated state that helps you to create the life that you want and you deserve on purpose. So if you are looking for help, please reach out, because I would be honored. All right, until next time, control your brain, or in fact, it will control you. I'll see you then.